Washington minus thousands of scientists and their supporters, feeling increasingly threatened by the policies of President Trump, gathered in Washington on Saturday for what they called the March for Science, abandoning a tradition of keeping the sciences out of politics, and calling on the public to stand up for the scientific enterprise. Their call was echoed by protesters in hundreds of cities across the United States and around the world, including at marches in Europe and the Asia-Pacific that had already concluded. In Washington, the rally was just getting underway Saturday morning, with thousands of people packing into the National Mall, some wearing white lab coats and ponchos on a misty day. Marchers carried signs calling for funding for scientific research. Science is not an alternative fact, some said. Others noted pointedly that Albert Einstein was a refugee. The March for Science evolved from a social media campaign into an effort to get people on the streets for the cause of science. Its organizers were motivated by Mr. Trump, who as a presidential candidate disparaged climate change as a hoax, and cast suspicions on the safety of vaccines. Their resolve deepened, they said, when the president appointed cabinet members who seemed hostile to the sciences, and then proposed a budget that would cut funding for research across the federal government. Organizers said they hoped the day's demonstrations result in sustained, coordinated action aimed at persuading elected officials to adopt policies consistent with the scientific consensus on climate change, vaccines, and other issues. This has been a living laboratory as scientists and science institutions are willing to take a step outside their comfort zone, outside of the labs and into the public spheres, said Beka Economopoulos, company founder of the pop-up Natural History Museum and an organizer of the march. This represents an escalation of a global movement that you're just beginning to hear from. What began as a movement by scientists for scientists has drawn in many science enthusiasts who have joined efforts to organize the marches. Courtney Kearney, who traveled to the march from Louisville, Kentucky, and plans to pursue a Master of Public Health degree, said she has been a lover of science from a young age and was worried about federal funding. I wouldn't have become the first person in my family with a science degree if it weren't for programs like PBS that they are defunding, she said, and programs they want to defund for STEM education in schools, the National Park Services, the museums, all of that. Science education is so crucial. Luis Fabish, 11, who traveled from Chicago with his father for the march, wore a white lab coat, a green bow tie and a hat with a pink, hand-knit brain. I want to keep people interested in science, he said. Many scientists at the marches said they believed now was the appropriate moment to express themselves politically. They fear Mr. Trump may undermine public support for the sciences. I can't think of a time where scientists felt the enterprise of science was being threatened in the way scientists feel now, Naomi Oreskes, a professor of the history of science at Harvard University, said in an interview this week. She was scheduled to speak at a rally in Boston on Saturday. Drive. Oreskes said the closest parallel to Saturday's protests were the demonstrations for nuclear disarmament in the 1950s and 60s. But scientists were then marching against the use of science to build weapons of mass destruction. For many marchers, especially those in the sciences who were demonstrating for the first time in their lives, political settings can be a source of discomfort. The march's organizers painted the event as nonpartisan, but clear political messages could be detected in the crowd. Critics of the march from within the sciences expressed concern that such displays could be damaging to the field. "I worry the march would drive the wedge deeper," said Robert S. Young, a coastal geologist at Western Carolina University who wrote a New York Times op-ed article in January expressing misgivings about the march. Although Drive. Young planned to support friends at a satellite demonstration in Vienna where he is traveling for work. He said that it would be easy for conservatives to say the march was really about supporting liberal policies. "Going to a march is easy," he said. "Spending the next couple of years reinventing how we communicate with Red State America. That's hard."